Hello and welcome to Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations. I'm your host, Nicholas McKay, and today I'm joined by Tiago Forte, creator of buildingasecondbrain.com, which you are, and I quote, on a mission to radically improve the effectiveness of human beings while making work a vehicle for personal growth. You're also the founder of Forte Labs and a writer of the Praxis newsletter, and I quote, again, together, we'll expand the definition of modern knowledge work, experiment with new ways of doing more with less, and explore what it means to fulfill our human potential. Welcome to Conversations, Tiago.
Thanks, Nick. Really happy to be here.
Good. Well, so let's jump right into the first section on your personal journey. So you were born here in Southern California, South Laguna, to immigrant parents from Brazil and the Philippines. So when you were young, what did you want to be when you grew up?
The main thing I wanted to be was an inventor.
Okay.
I think for like 4 Halloweens in a row, I was an inventor just every year.
And what does that consist of, the garb?
I don't think I really knew. I probably got that from some TV show or some movie. I would wear like a white lab coat. We had like this spray for like to make your hair silver. Okay. I think I was emulating Einstein, I guess. I would have like a little pocket protector, like a protractor in my other pocket. It was like a grab bag of different inventor kind of tropes, basically.
Sure. Did you have any like popular culture things from that? Like any like the mad, what you were describing just now, it seems for me like the mad scientist or Frankenstein, kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was mad scientist, it was researcher, it was normal scientist, it was inventor, all those things. I think something about like discovering knowledge or like the adventure of uncovering, deeper layers of reality or new insights always really appealed to me.
That's awesome. And then so with that, how was that affected by being born to like immigrant parents at different cultures, different households, but then also their different cultures now you live in and grew up in Southern California. So again, another different culture. So how was that kind of difference of growing up, impacted you? Early on especially.
This is something I've been thinking about more and more actually, it affected me in a lot of ways. One was just the diversity of cultures. Like we would, be cooking Filipino food in the kitchen. My dad's making an adobo, which is their national dish. Meanwhile, my mom is playing Brazilian music. Meanwhile, we're speaking in Spanish because we're in California. Meanwhile, like there's so many different influences combining. I think that always just gave me an appreciation for different cultures and how that relates to my work, I think is probably seeing things from different perspectives.
Sure.
Like something would happen in the world, some news event, and I would hear the American point of view, the Californian point of view, which is sometimes quite distinct, the Brazilian point of view, the Filipino point of view. My Brazilian family is actually European, they're from Italy. Just a couple generations ago. So there's also the Italian. It's like this just almost you choose which lens you want to use for any given event.
Well, that's so cool. And then especially with the, like universals like music or food, I bet those were very distinct differences. But then at the same time, when you put it together, that was a very unique Tiago, Forte life. Yeah. So like, what were some of the other things, early childhood influencers, thinkers, doers?
I was always a big reader, really big reader. I was definitely an introvert, very, very shy, and I needed a lot of alone time as a kid.
Okay.
So I would just read. In the earliest years, I remember my dad, he made sort of a business proposition, which is he would pay me 1 cent for every page that I read.
Oh, wow.
Instead of an allowance. There was my dad, he actually, one side is Filipino, the other side is Scots-Irish. Actually.
Oh, wow.
And most of his life was in the US, so there's that hard, kind of frugal thing going on. So he would pay me 1 cent for every page. That was his way of both incentivizing learning and also giving me an allowance. And I remember I read picture books, and I brought all the picture books to him and said, these are all the pages I've read. And he was like, no, they have to be real books. I remember this moment distinctly. Wow, he was like, no, those aren't real books. And I was like, oh, there's like a hierarchy here. There's like kid knowledge and adult knowledge.
I remember that distinctly with those. I don't know if you have seen them, but they're like the great classics, but like childrenized almost, you know, and they have like more pictures and like watered down points. Yes. But I loved those growing up. And then, but when I found out, I think it was Treasure Island or I think it was Robinson Crusoe. And then I saw the real book. I was like, wait, I've been hoodwinked. I
Yeah,
didn't know
I've
this.
been tricked.
So any other books that come to mind that really like maybe stuck out to you right now, and when you think back of like having a big influence?
Yeah, let's see. My favorite genre is historical fiction. Well, historical fiction and science fiction.
Okay.
That was probably a bit later, though. The earliest books, I would just read anything. I would just go through the library, pick up. I would read Hardy Boys, the adventure detective stories.
Sure.
I read the whole Little House on the Prairie set, which is like this thick.
Didn't read that.
Yeah, I was like, I couldn't tell any of my friends. They would have. I was afraid they'd make fun of me, but I loved Little House on the Prairie. It's an amazing story.
That's fun.
Let's see. I started reading sci-fi pretty early, and then really when I discovered James Michener. James Michener. He's one of the most well-known historical fiction novelists, and he has this style where he has a whole team of researchers, maybe like 5 or 6 people, and they spend years researching a country or a culture, and then he writes this just epic tale that is both historically based, so it's based in fact, but it's also fiction where he makes up characters.
Oh wow, that's great.
So I know a really absurd amount about these random places that he wrote books on, like South Africa, Poland, Alaska, Mexico, Palestine. Like he just picked these places.
You just went around the entire world right there.
Yeah.
And that is very interesting that's almost reinforcing your different multiculturalism, diversity.
Yeah.
You're also getting that through the pages.
It's true. I guess that is a huge theme.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, and then so with that, so not to dwell on that too much, but historical, is that more like Gore Vidal, like his things of like Lincoln and those other kind of books? Because he like researches heavily on that. But what was this guy's name again?
James Michener.
James Michener.
Yeah,
okay.
I think I haven't read Gore Vidal, but it's probably similar.
Cool.
It's like there's a strong historical underpinning. He's not making up historical events really, but then it's funny because you read history, and I remember the contrast between history and school, which is like facts and figures and this dry, like really boring. And then I would go home and read Michener, who's telling you like the story of like a young girl in Palestine in like the 14th century.
Right.
And it would come alive, and I was just like, I think I'm just realizing that one thing I think I took away from that is like, and this followed me throughout my school years, is school was something to get out of the way so that I could learn.
Oh, okay. So then
it was like, get that done so that I can go over here and do the learning I actually want to do.
Sure.
And I think that's how my love of learning, which I think is so many of us, it kind of gets extinguished by school.
Absolutely.
It was preserved. I just kind of made this split and thought, okay, this is what the adults want me to do. This is the stuff I like to learn about.
Damn, that's interesting. And then so after this, you now are going to study abroad in Brazil. So was that a big culture shock, or because of this kind of like growing up at least in a Brazilian household, you at least had a little bit of a help? And then how was that experience valued out through your life as well?
Yeah, so even before the end of college, I started several years abroad. And it was really just, I was getting towards the end of college. This was like 2008, 2009. The economy was just in the toilet.
December 2009 for me too. So,
oh yeah?
Yeah,
me too, just right around there.
Yeah.
And I was just looking at my prospects and thinking, wow, there's really not a lot of opportunities. And also realize, it's funny, there's this other moment I remember where, I grew up with this feeling that I was different, that I was special. I think because of our abroad experiences, our travel, the multiculturalism. But then growing up and getting to the end of college, I just realized, wow, I feel special, but I don't really have any special skills or knowledge. Right. I had this sort of this moment where I just realized I actually need to differentiate myself. Sure. I need to develop unique kinds of things and not do what I always felt like I did, which is sample a million different things.
Hey, that you're speaking to someone that literally has been going through that recently, exactly, in that regard. That's awesome.
And so my last year of college I spent in Brazil in 2 different schools. Then it was the end of college, and I thought, I don't want to go home. Let me find something else. So I got a job in Colombia doing microfinance.
Right.
It was sort of a halfway point. Did that for 6 months, became completely disillusioned with microfinance and nonprofits in general.
Okay.
And then I had like a year or two before started applying for the Peace Corps. And so mid 2009, I left for the Peace Corps in Ukraine.
Right.
And that was almost 2.5 years.
And then so walk us through kind of that, in that those decisions to then allow yourself even the opportunity to do those things. No, I know plenty of people that even the prospect of moving to California or other things, it gets to be too much. But then, so you apply, you go to the Peace Corps, and then now you're there. So like, what are some of the most distinct differences, I guess you could say? Because again, the Peace Corps is a legitimate institution, is they're doing something, they're organizing at some sort. So like, how is that different than like you just kind of microfinance in Colombia, studying abroad?
I guess I thought that it would be more structured.
Okay.
I thought, it's been around for 40 plus years. It's the U.S. government.
Right.
It has this, and Ukraine is one of the largest Peace Corps countries. They had like 200 volunteers there at the time. And I guess I thought, these small nonprofits, it's because they're just disorganized and don't have their stuff together. Let me go and do serious development work.
Yes.
That was not the case.
Validity.
It wasn't more structured. It was not more organized. They basically just stuck you in this small town, and it's by design too.
Yeah.
In the past, they would have people with highly specialized roles like engineers or whatever, and they found over time that it's actually generalists. It's people who are just very flexible, willing to take on whatever challenge or problem in their city that presents itself are really the successful ones. So I completely get it, and I love the Peace Corps. I highly recommend it, especially post college, where you don't know what you're going to do, and instead of just falling into something, having 2 years where you learn a new language, which is a huge professional asset. Absolutely. You develop skills. You develop communication skills, resilience, adaptability, all these things. Absolutely. And of course, you make awesome friends, which later in life become your network. And it's all paid for by Uncle Sam. Like, it's really, it's a privilege. It's a privilege and a great deal.
That's really awesome that opportunity is out there, because I think a lot of people kind of fall in the nowadays more so are disillusioned with kind of the American academic college route. And then something like that, is at least something to figure out if you even want to do that. Not saying that you should or shouldn't, but give yourself some time, and let yourself actually think about what you want to do, because like you just said, the life will put you in to one of these things if you don't yourself do it your own way.
Yeah, that period is so unique. Early mid-20s, because it doesn't feel like it, but you have nothing to lose. You just have no ties, no connect. You're just like a nomad. Yeah. And I encourage people to something, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, volunteer, live abroad, study abroad, work abroad, do something outside of that mainstream channel. Absolutely. Because as soon as you get in that channel, it's really hard to escape and do something else.
Well, so then let's kind of come back to some of the microfinancing and stuff. So because yes, I guess I would say that I grew up kind of privileged and definitely not kind of, but definitely very privileged in the South, going to a nice boarding school, et cetera. But then a lot of the things, I just like, I could pay for it, but not everyone can pay for it, and do those things. But then all these other things of GoFundMe, crowdfunding, things like that. Yeah. How is that kind of this entire thing of, again, microfinance, you said you got disillusioned in that, but then now this like, more decentralized kind of like per person subjective basis of microfinance is more apparent. So maybe talk on those differences you've seen of in that, because you being disillusioned in microfinance and NGOs, I'm not surprised. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's really different. The whole crowdfunding thing.
Sure.
And they sometimes do call it microfinance in the developed world.
Okay.
It's just so different. I mean, I was in one of the poorest parts of Colombia. And, we would have these amazing stories come out of people who had, their businesses started and investments funded by microfinance. But it's really hard to change people's basic economic situation. Really hard.
Very hard.
Like with a couple of things that I learned with these small businesses, sometimes you would fund a few of them and they would just compete with each other. Right. Like usually there's one, say, panaderia. There's like a panaderia in Spanish. That's selling bread. If you fund three others, the fundamental demand. It's not like there's been a new factory that has been built in the region. That there's the
or
same,
a bunch more people,
or nothing like that. There's the same amount of income, the same amount of demand, which means you're just splitting the demand among more people. And there's still uses for microfinance. For example, income smoothing. Okay. One of the biggest challenges for poor people in these countries is just the fluctuations in income.
Yes.
They have enough.
Of course.
It's just that a dip or a medical emergency or a flat tire happens, say, at the end of the month when they have to pay their rent because they're living month to month.
Absolutely.
And so they would use microfinance not to like start a new business, which was sort of the aspirational use case, but just to smooth out that income a little bit. So, that's perfectly legitimate.
Yeah, and those peaks and troughs, I mean, that can throw things out, a lot of things. I think I read a statistic here in the United States, even, I think like 40% of Americans can't afford that, like you said, $400 kind of emergency kind of thing. So it seems to be that we need some income smoothing here in the United States,
Well, things like Uber, that's a lot of what it is.
Okay, sure.
It's like there's so few ways to just earn money when you need it rather than committing to this long-term thing.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's what we're seeing with the ride sharing.
And we'll get into the future of work a little bit more. That's great. And so so you get into a little bit of product development, consulting for large companies, and then Forte Labs. So maybe talk about how you got from Peace Corps. You gained all these skills, and like you said, and then now you're coming back to the United States. Take us through like kind of your thought process of what was going on in your head, what you kind of had goals on, and then how you eventually started Forte Labs.
Yeah, it was quite a journey. So in the Peace Corps, I really loved it, really had an amazing time. But of all the projects I worked on, and you would work on many because that's your full-time job, that's all you're doing there. I started teaching these, I didn't even think of them this way at the time, but essentially like how to get organized, how to plan your day, your schoolwork, classes. I would do it after school, and then eventually we did weekend camps, and then in the summer we would do like week-long summer camps. Okay. And it was stuff that I didn't have to, it's just the basics you learn, say, going to high school in the US, how to manage an agenda, how to plan your classes, how to schedule your time, how to make a list of your goals, all these kinds of things. But in Ukraine, it's the infrastructure after the fall of the Soviet Union was so decimated. The school system, they just don't have a strong foundation for things like planning, organization, project management, community service.
Just like it's all based on chaos, like kind of deal, or just ad hoc.
It's very ad hoc, very unplanned, from the state level down to the individual level, and so I just saw that these kids, it was like giving them water in the desert. No one had taught them, say, how to just look at their schedule of classes and decide, okay, this is, how I'm going to spend my time. This is when I'm going to do different things. And for the summer camp, we actually had them do big projects, community service projects. Right. So we would like paint graffitied walls. We would do trash cleanups. We did like a renovation of a library, different things. And they would come out of these experiences. We don't think community service is kind of just it's a part of life here in some ways. Like you just do little, bake sales or like little things as part of as part of growing up. For them, it was really transformational. And they would like use these projects to apply to college. They would use the planning skills to apply for jobs. It's been 7-8 years and I still hear messages back of how these little workshops impacted them. That's awesome. It's really amazing.
Well, I mean, and that's so funny that I was having a recent conversation about like little wins and little kind of things that long way down the road become huge influences. So I'm assuming that like something so principled or something so, basic in the framework of like the architecture of how to be organized, I think that helped a long way. So then, so how did you take that from doing these workshops, doing this stuff, and then I'm assuming what you're going with this is going into this full time as a professional in other consulting scene?
Yeah, so I came back from the Peace Corps end of 2011, and the job market was a bit better. Stayed with my parents in Orange County for a few months, and decided at some point, the only thing I knew about my career, I had dabbled in so many different things, I had no clear path forward, but I knew that I loved technology, always did. And I knew I wanted to be in San Francisco, which seemed to be where that whole scene was happening. And I applied to a couple jobs, accepted one of them, which was for a small boutique consulting firm based in Paris. It's a French company, but this was their San Francisco office. And it was the very best introduction to kind of Silicon Valley and tech you could imagine, because on the consulting side, we had clients we worked for Toys R Us, for car companies, for telecom companies, doing, consulting, whatever they need, whatever they want is, whatever the project ends up becoming. And then also we ran a co-working space called Parasoma in downtown San Francisco. And there, and it was a small team, so we would manage both sides, right? It wasn't like in a huge corporation where you're so siloed, you're so specialized. We would just do, it felt like a startup.
Yeah, you're putting on a lot of hats, jack of all trades, et cetera.
One minute I'm on a conference call with like some executive at a client organization. The next minute I'm like literally like mopping up something that someone spilled in the kitchen of the co-working space.
But those are good experiences.
It really is. That's the startup mindset.
Yeah.
It's not oh, this is the end of my job responsibility. That's the line. No, you just do whatever is needed. And so I spent 18 months there. And I left, actually, it's a funny story, when I had my first performance review, which I had never had before. I'd worked in retail, small odd jobs, but never had like a feedback session. And I remember so vividly my boss sitting me down, looking over my form, and actually giving me great feedback. She was like, you're diligent, you're hardworking, you're very focused, all these things. But then she proceeded to kind of lay out this career path for me that I think she thought was enticing and attractive. She was like, you're a junior project manager now. In a couple more years, you could be a project manager. In a couple more years, you could be a senior project manager. A few years after that, maybe even one day a director. And she's laying out, like 20 years of my life. And I just realized this path, I don't want to walk it. I'm not interested. And something else I saw too is the higher up that ladder I got, the harder I would have to work. I looked at my company, and the more senior the person, the later they stayed, the harder they worked, the more phone calls on evenings and weekends they were taking. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. And I just thought, I better nip it in the bud right now. I better just stop. And I left, and I wish I could say that and I'm not sure I would recommend this, but I wish I had a plan or even any savings. I had no savings. I had maybe like 1 month's rent. San Francisco is an expensive city. And that ended up actually being kind of not perfect, but I needed that forcing function. I needed that deadline. And actually in the subsequent years, more or less every time I've launched something big or really reached a big milestone, it's been under this incredible pressure. There has to be some kind of
Humans
deadline.
are interesting like that. We can adapt, but then when you put us in a corner, we can get some things done. So that's interesting how like that light of a fire can really get things action.
Totally. I was dating my now wife, and I was like, if I can't pay the rent, then I have to move back in with my parents, and that whole thing is going to collapse. That was a big incentive.
That's a funny way to put it.
And I just I started. I didn't even decide for a year or two. I never thought, I'm starting a company. That didn't occur to me for a long time. I just thought, I am trying to survive. Let me do any project, any gig that I can to just pay the next month's rent. And the first thing I created, the first project I did was an online course because I had been very much in that world. I really believed in it. And that drew on my skills. In the Peace Corps, I was a teacher. In South America, I was a teacher. So teaching was natural. And the video stuff had become much more approachable. You could just do a screen capture on your computer. You could do very simple slides. It's like those tools have now become within reach. And that online course I got very lucky, was very successful, gave me maybe 6 months to a year of runway that I could kind of work with. And I just kind of went from there.
That's great. Okay, and then we'll come back and talk to that just briefly. But right now we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back to talking about building a second brain and Forte Labs. Okay, and we're back with conversations with guest Tiago Forte. So I mentioned in your intro a specific phrase that has great weight with me from a personal hero of mine, Buckminster Fuller, and his coining of the term ephemeralization, which is, quote, the ability of technological advancement to do, quote, more and more with less and less until eventually you can do everything with nothing. Can you speak a little bit more on that concept and then how you kind of came around to starting Forte Labs?
Yeah, that's an important concept. I think it's, I work in this kind of intersection of tech, productivity, future of work, all these things. But one of my biggest influences has been manufacturing. Like traditional manufacturing. I never worked in it, don't really have any real world experience in manufacturing itself, but there is this idea called the theory of constraints that was invented by this Israeli physicist in the 50s or 60s that went on to profoundly influence how factories are run, how manufacturing is done. And there are so many principles in manufacturing that apply directly to even the most advanced modern knowledge work. But you talk to most knowledge workers, people who work on computers all day, and they think, oh, manufacturing, that's the past, that's obsolete, that's dead. And it creates this blind spot where we don't learn from the past. We don't learn from the centuries of industrialization and the really powerful principles that were discovered. So the connection to that is, I think, you say the word efficiency and people kind of poo-poo it, like, efficiency, that's for the factory, that's for, the old style. But there's something about efficiency, which is not just doing things faster. That's what people think, just like widgets, which is doing more with less. That's when you have a highly efficient process, you don't have all this, like going back to Toyota, they have low waste or zero waste. That's an efficient process. That's not discarding all this stuff. And if you get that principle and apply it to modern work, and it's leverage. That's also what leverage is doing a lot with a little. So there's this thread of like efficiency, leverage, doing more with less that goes back hundreds of years. And this connects back to, we talked about history. I learned so much from history that I feel like if people read more history, they wouldn't have to learn everything, reinvent the wheel and learn everything from scratch.
And we're going to get into that with your second brain a little bit later, because that's exactly one of your principles, is like starting over from scratch again. And that just is such a time waste, resource waste, everything.
Yes.
And that is the most non-efficient thing or inefficient thing that you could do.
Totally.
So in that way, what are some of those, I guess, principles? Because nowadays, like for me in manufacturing, I think of additive manufacturing and 3D printing, because then, like you just said, is that it's almost baked into the system or architecture that like, hey, this is only just this particular prototype at this particular time, and that we will always be adding a little bit, but then that takes in that historical context that you were just saying. We have all of the other prototypes before then, and you can see the trajectory of where it was, where the design, what changed, and stuff like that. So, I mean, when it's changed, how can you update, I guess you could say, other than not getting too much, but like update our concept of industrialization and those principles that, like, maybe like you said, are a little poo-pooed or blind spotted right now?
There's a lot of ways. I mean, really, my work with building a second brain is about ideas, and really thinking. It sounds very funny, but to think of your life, your work, your brain as a pipeline of ideas, like a factory. It feels day to day very mysterious and creative and all these things, but you can conceive of your work as just ideas come in from somewhere. From podcasts, from videos, interviews, from books you read, articles, conferences, seminars, classes, whatever, has to come in somewhere, right? Then there's some sort of processing you do. You summarize it, you curate it, you categorize it, you turn it into some other form, you split it up into pieces and distribute it. Knowledge workers, it's funny, that's, if you really observe a knowledge worker, all they're doing is getting ideas, processing them in some way, and then there's an output. There's some sort of, you're emailing it, you're publishing it, you're uploading it. And if you look at that process and just decide, and this was the great breakthrough of Toyota. Up until Toyota, the assumption was you can do a lot of something or you can do it well. That was the fundamental trade-off. Right. You were this, big factory or you were a craftsman, and there was nothing in between, right? And Toyota came along and said, no, you can achieve quality through quantity.
Right.
You can produce so many that the little defects and the little errors and mistakes naturally rise to the surface, and then you fix those, and then you spin up production again, and quality and quantity, rather than being trade-offs, become one and the same.
Right.
And I believe the very same thing is possible with knowledge workers. If you look at knowledge workers, it's not the case. Just look out in the world that there's people making a lot of work. Let's just talk about creative work, right? Or people doing the best. The people doing the best are also doing the most.
Right.
Look at people on social media. Do you ever wonder, like, how does this person comes out with a new, whatever it is, book, conference, class, video, blog post, just at a breakneck pace? It's because they've discovered this phenomenon of using quantity as a path to quality.
Yeah, and what is it, the Perotti principle, that like 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people in like an organization?
I think that's one reason why.
But then also yourself, it's like you can kind of do that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so your big thing, if you said this in your 10 principles of building a second brain, if I had to give everyone one piece of advice for improving their productivity and learning, it would be principles over prescription. So let's go the most broad sense of why do I need a second brain? Because what you were just talking about, knowledge work, ideas come in, they get contextualized of some sort, and then you have an output. Well, that you're just talking about a brain. You know, you're talking about literally synthesizing information or something to do. So why do I need a second one? You know, why do I need a second one if I'm already doing this?
Yeah. So most people aren't doing that. That's the first thing.
Good.
They're sort of coming into work from this hour to this hour and sort of just reacting to things. You know, they have a meeting and someone says, oh, here's the next action. They go do that. Then they have a phone call. Someone says that. It's sort of reactive, like bowling balls hitting each other.
Sure.
They're not systematic about it. If they need a piece of information right now, they go and find that piece of information. If, you know, they're not really thinking of their work as accumulating knowledge assets and then putting those assets to use again and again. There's a great parallel to money. You know, if you're living hand to mouth, you need $1 now, you go get $1. It's like very on demand.
Scarcity mindset.
Scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Whereas the abundance mindset is you get your money and you invest it in assets that then do work for you. They produce income for you.
Totally.
It's a much more long-term, strategic, intentional way of thinking that I think people clearly understand this. With money, with productivity, it's less clear.
Right. And then but you also said every tip and tactic has a shelf life and will someday become outdated. Even the most cutting edge new app will eventually lose relevance, and we even see that in Fortune 500 companies. You know, those change after a decade or so like that. And then so with that, how do you bake things into the system? Because for me, my biggest proponent of baking things into the system architecture is Bitcoin. You know, in the blockchain, and that at least the idea. I know we can get into other things and what you think about, but for me, just baking that into the system architecture, the trust or the need for productivity, efficiency in manufacturing, et cetera. If it's baked into the system and everyone gets it and utilizes it as such, but if it's not, then it's just this kind of, again, ad hoc, non-efficient kind of way. So how can you use that knowingly that this is going to become outdated, if you will?
I mean, my recommendation there is to focus on the system for generating insights rather than any particular insight. This comes back to the principles, not prescriptions. People want a quick fix always. They want to take a pill. They want to install a plugin. They want to use a certain kind of productivity app. Just do a one-time, one action that will just magically fix everything. That never works, of course, in any area. It may work very temporarily as a temporary fix, but you have to really be unattached from any particular hack or trick or tip or prescription. Yep. If you look at the kind of the advice industry, people in my industry, they'll often get on stage, for example, and say what they've learned. Right? Oh, I learned X, Y, Z. These are the 3 principles. These are the 3 steps, right?
Yes.
But it's like, that's the output of their system when actually their real secret is the system itself. The thing, the situation they've created that allows them to even reach such insights, not the insights themselves. Insights come and go, they come and go. And so that's why I really focus on the system. We have our 10 principles here, I have the takeaways, all that, but the reason I teach a course, let's say, and I'm working on a book, but I started with a course for building a second brain, is I need to lead people through the steps of setting things up. It's not an off-the-shelf thing, you just do what I do. It's a customization process,
Sure.
Looking at what are the kinds of information you consume? How do you process those? Where do you publish them? And then working with them to kind of design their own second brain, which is what I call that system.
Right, and then that's so fantastic because literally, as you put in one of your posts, Silvano Arietti says, "Creative products are always shiny and new. The creative process is ancient and unchanging." Yeah. So, I guess speak about, because I mean, if this is not something new and these principles are kind of been going on through history, I guess take us into kind of that thinking, because like you said, we're in a hyper connected world, but then a hyper fast world. Everyone, what is it, Google or what was it, move fast and break things, and sometimes it's like you may not need to break anything. You may need to go in reverse. You may need to pause. So like you said, it's more the principles of like, what situation are we in? How can we do that? And then move forward rather than, hey, here's a prescription for what you do when this thing arises, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so that quote is great because it shows you want to invest in things that last, right? So if you invest in the fad of the moment, the trend of the moment, you're kind of on a treadmill that you're going to have to always keep running. But there's something more fundamental than that, which is the creative process. Right. That you can read stuff written by the ancient Greeks about creativity, and it still applies. Right. It's just as relevant right now as it was thousands of years ago. And so that's where I really want people to invest, and it's funny because the creative process, I've asked a lot of people, like, do you have a creative process? Very few people even know what that is or why they would have one. Some artists do, maybe like painters and poets, they might have a little bit of awareness. But what's happening in the economy now is having a creative process went from this like tiny little niche thing needed by a tiny percentage of the population to now something that everyone needs. Every single knowledge worker, and we're all knowledge workers now, needs a creative process. Otherwise, you're trying to make something with no system, no tools, no steps. And that is not just a recipe for failure, like not creating good work. It's exhausting. It is exhausting to work and to live that way.
Oh, that's totally true. And then but in today's world, I mean, I just watched a TED Talk that was the actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and he's Batman, he eventually became Robin and Dark Knight, Inception, and all that jazz. His talk was specifically about creativity and attention, and his kind of thought or whole talk was about how he had craved, like what he craved was attention, acting and doing all these things. But what he really craved was the underlying creativity. When that, when he hits mark and then the director says action, then like he's in this zone, and we're all looking for that. In today's day and age, all of our attention is being split. So it seems like creativity almost is not an antidote, but it is something that goes against that attention, because if you're using your attention for something that within and creative, then you automatically are putting non-attention to other things by definition. But I think a lot of people just have their attention just taken over, because they don't have at least processes, like you said, or system principles to then be doing something else that's more attractive to themselves internally. Because if not, well then seeing the Kardashians and sitting in front of Netflix for hours on end, and just doing that life, that can become just the status quo and become very comfortable. Yeah. And creativity, it seems like can be somewhat to get out of that. So what are some of the principles for creativity to take against the attention kind of mindset that everyone's trying to grab at right now?
Yeah, it's a great observation. Oh man, there's so much there. I've really been studying ADHD and related conditions because I read this article, I think it was in Harvard Business Review, that now they're starting to think of it less like a disease or a condition, and they're calling it a trait, attention deficit trait. It seems to be almost just this like thing that we all have to some degree or another.
And it's just maybe more pronounced.
Exactly. Okay. It's almost just a part of modern life to have your attention split in that way, right?
Yes.
But I think so. Man, a couple things. First, there really are consequences to that. Right. There was this thing called the Happiness Project out of Harvard that studied the relationship between attention and happiness. And they did these random sampling things where they would ask you, I was part of it, they ask you on your phone, how are you feeling and what are you doing? And they would correlate what you're doing with how you feel. But anyway, your viewers can look that up. But they found this, what the single thing most correlated with unhappiness was? Of all the things they studied, not where you are, whether you're at home at work, not who you're with, not even really what you're doing. The thing that was linked to unhappiness the most was just having your mind in a different place from where you are right now. Essentially dissociation.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
Dissociation.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
You're not present.
Exactly. Yeah. The opposite of presence.
Yeah.
And that's a remarkable finding, right? Considering the way we live, constantly being distracted, interrupted, notified by different things. But there's all these TED Talks and motivational speeches about, oh, you just need to be more present. You need to be more here. You need to be more all these things. And that doesn't really work. I mean, I meditate. I love meditation. But you can't just decide to be present. Or at least it's very challenging. So to me, creativity is the antidote.
Right.
Because creativity gives you something to fixate on, gives an object to your attention, but one that can absorb all your attention, that you can sort of lose yourself in. I mean, that's the experience of flow, is you lose awareness of yourself. It's like you're not even there. And so to me, creativity, flow, making things, really truly making things, not just consuming, is a more practical way of addressing this attention crisis than just, exhorting people to be more present, whatever that means.
Right. And I think but I think it maybe comes in a consortium of things. Like if you are also meditating and then trying to be more present that way, but then you have, your calendar, schedules, things like that, then that can really help out when you put together things in that nature. So then what I'm going to do right now to end the rest of this segment is basically just go through these 10 core principles of idea management, because I know we said that we're not trying to put up prescriptions and these are principles, but so I want to basically not exactly try like a lightning round, but like when I say the word that is one of the core principles, just riff really quickly on what exactly comes up to mind or what you want to get across.
Perfect. Okay.
So borrowed creativity. What is that? Just stealing? Art idea stealing?
Yeah, don't borrow and give credit, which I think is the difference with stealing. Give all the credit in the world.
That's true. I was being facetious.
And then stand on the shoulders of giants. That's what comes to mind. Don't think you're going to reinvent the wheel.
Very good. And then so the capture habit. What's that? So don't play catch and release with your thoughts.
Yeah, it's basically, we live in this hyper rich information environment, but if you don't actually capture it, collect it, save it in one place, it actually is just like the wind, just flows in, flows out, and you feel like you learned something, but actually when you're asked to recall or use any of that, it's just not even there.
Right. Very true. Next, number 3, idea recycling. So ideas are not single use only.
So it's related. It's once you are saving things, collecting things, and you start to look at this little library of knowledge that you're collecting, and you realize, that when this related project comes up, I can reuse that solution. If I came up with a document template for a report that I was writing, I can use that in the next report.
Right.
If I made a checklist of all the filming setup and how to set up the lighting, I can reuse that template. It's like every little bit of intellectual labor, and it's funny, people don't think of this as intellectual labor. It is. When you sit down and really think, you just created something of durable value. Don't just get that thing of durable value and throw it into your recycling bin. Use it.
Yeah. Okay, number 4, projects over categories. So instead of organizing ideas by categories, you organize your ideas according to the products where they'll be most useful and actionable.
Yeah, this is my big thing I see in the entire world of organizing information, from libraries to databases to archives, everything. People tend to organize by categories. They think psychology, marketing, gardening, business, like as if it's the Dewey Decimal System.
Right.
Dewey Decimal works great for libraries. They have a full-time staff. It doesn't work for individuals.
Right.
For individuals, you want to organize, the best way to organize information is according to the projects that you're working on, because they're right here. They're front and center. There's a finite number because you're a finite human being. It is really a far more actionable, practical way of organizing.
Sure. So slow burns is number 5. Stop completing your projects via heavy lifts, grueling slogs of painful work where you create everything from scratch. There is another way, you say.
Yeah, heavy lifts are, I'm going to block off. I see people. I need to make a new video for my YouTube channel. I'm going to block off the whole weekend. Turn off my phone. No one can talk to me. I'm not going to eat. I'm barely going to sleep. That's a heavy lift, right? And as I'm 34. I'm slowly getting up there in years, and I can't, even at 34, I can't remotely do in terms of heavy lifts what I did even 5 years ago in my 20s.
Very true.
And I can't even imagine, in my 40s and 50s. And so I think we have to start, and also just for your wellness, your balance, your health, you can't keep doing these heavy lifts. Slow burns are the opposite. You slowly start collecting. It's like a little drip feed. Slowly start taking a web clip from a web page, a snippet of a song, an image you take maybe from a museum. all these little bits of creative material, and you put them almost like it's like a pot on your stove that's slow cooking.
Oh, that's good. Yeah,
You're not there having to pay attention to it.
More
flavor. It's richer. It's deeper.
Yeah.
It's more complex.
That's good. Okay, and then number 6, we talked about earlier when the scarcity mindset. Number 6 is start with abundance. So starting with the abundance mindset, creativity flows from abundance. So when you're thinking that way, then the creative process, I'm assuming, can just begin flowing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Just don't start with a blank canvas ever. Not a blank screen, not a blank canvas, not a blank anything. It's like Legos. You start with a huge collection of Legos and you start kind of piecing through them. When you find 2, they come together, and then you start something takes shape.
Right.
That's how creativity really works, not this like bolt from the blue kind of thing.
That's a good point. Yeah, the Archimedes, aha moment. Eureka.
Yeah, eureka.
Number 7, intermediate packet. So cranking out work in one big push. This is kind of, I think, similar to slow burns. It requires a lot of motivation and self-discipline. And then also I know decision fatigue as well. Like making more decisions than by the time the end of the day is, then you can make less of them. Yeah. Or at least effective decisions. Yeah. So intermediate packets.
Yeah, it's basically, I really want people to dumb down their work. If your work is complex, if it sometimes seems complex to you, which seems to be the case with everyone, dumb it down, break it into little pieces, tackle one piece at a time, save those pieces in one place, and reuse them to make new things. Intermediate packages is basically, when you have this massive project that's going to take months, don't try to, boil the ocean with that. Break it into little pieces and then give all of your attention, coming back to attention. Yep. Allow yourself to be immersed in just this one. If you can end every day just having created one thing of true value, you're going to be so far ahead of most people. It feels slow because you're like, I only did one thing today, but then the flywheel starts. Yep. And over a few weeks, you start having this like collection of assets.
Yep, I totally agree with that one. Number 8, you only know what you make. So don't just passively consume huge volumes of information that gets forgotten. Instead, use what you learn to make new things. And that's what I think you just were kind of mentioning too. Actually have something of produce something also.
Yeah. Instead of, I see people, especially smart people who like information, like learning, they like to stockpile knowledge. Yeah. I've read 100 books. I've read 1,000 articles. And you're like, well, what have you done? What have you produced? Oh no, I'm just, it's there. It's my secret.
Right.
You really only know whether you've learned anything once you actually try to put it into practice, and then you actually realize usually, oh, actually, I don't know what I'm talking about. Right. And then you have to go back and actually learn it.
Yeah, and then it's like the first, I think it's in war, they talk about how your battle plan only lasts till the first contact. Yeah. Same thing with like ideas. Yeah. It only really or theories, excuse me. It doesn't only really works until the action, you really start doing that. And then you figure out if it's working, not.
Exactly. If you read a book, you haven't learned anything. You have a plan. You have a battle plan. That's it. Only once you start actually putting it into implementation, putting it into practice, do you know whether you've learned anything.
That's cool. Yeah. So number 9, make it easier for your future self. I'm looking out for my future Nick. You're looking out for your future Tiago. Yeah. Everyone needs to look out for their future selves.
Yes. Yeah. This is kind of a deeper one. It's like, the scarcity mindset we talked about earlier is acting as if your future self doesn't exist or it doesn't matter or
because only me now.
Your present self is the only self.
Right.
But I think and this has to do with wisdom, it has to do with self-awareness, it has to do with a lot of things. But as you grow in life and in work and just in general, yourself almost gets extended in time, where you start to connect with your past self, understand your story, where you came from, how it made you who you are. Is the past, also the future. You start to think about the future, think about your kids, your future kids, your grandkids, future generations. And that is a powerful experience to be extended. And a relatively minor side effect is you start thinking, oh, the way I'm constructing this, let's say, document now, I could do it a slightly different way that will make my 1 week future self, their job easier. And you start to make different decisions. And over time, again, the flywheel. That person is you, so you get to benefit from that work. It's not like you're giving something away.
No, and those are those fun situations when literally you like see something that you've done before that you are now like benefiting from. You're like, oh, thanks, past self who was looking out for me.
And that makes you want to pay it forward again.
Totally.
It's this self-reinforcing cycle.
That's great. And then so lastly, number 10, keep your ideas moving. Systems that must be perfect to be reliable are deeply flawed. So again, we have 10 principles, but I guess the 10th principle is that there's not any number of principles.
Don't wait until you perfectly understand all the principles to start doing this. Yeah.
Okay. And then so I guess contextualizing all of that into a second brain has been one of your big things. So a class, it started out as a class, right?
It still is, yeah. It's an online course, and I also do live workshops.
Right. And then so part of that second brain, I guess to give your pitch, if you will, of I guess taking your class, maybe a 15, 20-second pitch of like what I would as a person gain from taking, your class as how to build my second brain now.
Yeah, I would just say, building a second brain is the antidote to self-help. All of self-help, self-improvement, productivity is about improving yourself, optimizing yourself. But I just think that's not what humans are for. Mm-hmm. Humans are meant to enjoy. They're meant to play. Right. They're meant to be in relationship, be in conversation, the things that only humans can do. And so with building a second brain, the reason we want a second brain, the reason we're building one, is you want to optimize a system outside of yourself so that you don't have to be optimized. I really, I don't want people to do more. So many books you read on this area are like, you need to do this and this and this. Actually, I want you to do less. I want you to outsource so much of your cognitive labor that is so taxing to software, to technology, which has finally, after so many years, gotten powerful and advanced enough to do that. And the reason it's a course is it's a customized process. I have to lead students through their own process of sort of designing their system. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing because every one of us works on different things, has different kinds of creativity, different skills. So really, it is the process of creating a system that handles a lot of life for you, handles a lot of your work for you so that you can do less.
Fantastic. Okay, and so that basically finishes up this section about talking about building the second brain. So we're going to take a short break and we'll be back talking about the future of work. Okay, and we are back to conversations with guest Tiago Forte. Tiago's mission is to help knowledge workers use design and technology to transform their productivity, elevating their performance, and reframing their relationship to work. He writes, speaks, and delivers workshops on his online courses. We just talked briefly before about including building a second brain. And he also teaches fundamental skills for working in the digital age. And one of those being writing a newsletter called Praxis. So tell us how that all started. How did you kind of think that writing was kind of your forte, if you will?
Yeah. I've always loved writing.
Yeah.
Definitely goes way back. When we lived overseas, my family in Brazil, I think it was the first time I remember writing something, not because I had to. We would have these just amazing adventures in Brazil as a family, and I would write mass emails. We had our first little compact laptop. This was like 1999.
Okay, cool. And
I would had this crazy dial-up modem connection thing, but I would write little stories, and I still remember the feeling of getting feedback on those. As I was 14 years old, to have people write back like, this is such a great story. And they weren't great. I've gone back and looked. They were not well written. They were just fun, And I kind of continued that, did a travel blog when I lived on my own in South America in college, which was kind of like my first thing as an adult or near adult. And then around 2014, I think it was, I started a new blog called Praxis. So Praxis is the blog and the newsletter that goes out. And I think the first post was this meditation retreat I went on. I came back and just thought, that was wild. I need to write about this. So I had
people need to know.
People need to know, or at least I need to get it out. I didn't think anyone, I didn't know if anyone would read.
That's a good point,
But I went on Medium. Kind of same thing with my business. I never intended to start a business until much later. With blogging, I just started writing on Medium, which makes it effortless. You get on there, you click new post, and you start writing, and you hit publish. That's it. Yeah. And I had my blog on Medium for like 2+ years, 3 years, and no system, no schedule. If I felt like I would write about something, but then slowly started having some reactions, some positive feedback. And it was really only in like 2016, beginning of 2016, that I got really serious. And now it's the absolute backbone of everything I do. Every idea starts as a blog post. Every course that I take or conference I go to, everything I learn becomes a blog post. Many of the books I read, I write blog posts. It's like that pipeline we talked about earlier of ideas. What that really looks like for me is my blog.
Right.
So it's really just it's my playground and my experimentation lab. You know, I don't always stick at all to just productivity. Maybe 2/3 of the posts are about that, but it's just like personal growth and history and cultural stuff, and just anything that I feel like writing about goes there.
That's great. And then, so I guess parlaying that into one of your more notable blog posts that I kind of saw and kind of resonated with was your Praxis Manifesto of human-centered work. And so before we get into that, let's just talk, I guess, set the stage on why human-centered work is maybe needed more so now than ever because of automation and all the things that, you know, just the industrialization of work, et cetera. Even though manufacturing and all those other things may still be valid nowadays, you know, work is such a, I guess, soul-crushing thing that people think of. And, you know, human-centered work is going to be way more important moving forward into the automation realm and modernity with artificial intelligence, et cetera.
Yeah. So this manifesto really came about because I noticed that there's this atmosphere right now, and I guess for some time, that you have to do whatever it takes to survive. You know, automation is coming for you, AI is coming, outsourcing, the Asian tigers, like all these threats.
Name your boogeyman.
Yeah, name your boogeyman. There's so many threats. And so the subtext to a lot of that is you better shape up. You better work harder, you better sacrifice, you better really just scrabble in the dirt to make a living. And it's hard because I don't want to deny the reality of those difficulties. It is really difficult, you know. We were talking before we started filming about the difficulty of getting our first jobs, like how bad the market is, how few opportunities there are. But at the same time, I think the way that we're going to overcome those challenges is not by like forgetting our humanity and just putting our nose to the grindstone. It's going to be inventing a new kind of work that is human-centered, where human growth and human satisfaction and human fulfillment is at the very center. And what that looks like is creative work. I really want to make work relentlessly more creative. And this even goes back to building a second brain. You know, if you look at the different activities you do, I think the average person, 80% or 70% of what they do can be done by computers.
Sure.
So we can protect that and defend against the computers. No, I want to do that 70%. That's for me. But in the long term, I think we should just give it away.
Totally.
Give all that stuff to computers. And what that does is it elevates ourselves, our attention to that top 30%, which is going to get, you know, smaller and smaller. And that is both more creative and more human-centered. It's more fulfilling. It just inherently is.
Have you read Team Human by Douglas Rushkoff?
No.
Oh, it's great. So I'll have to recommend this to you. Basically, he talks about how it's not just in work, but in all of modernity and life, is that there's this almost anti-human agenda in technology. You know, in that it's like, you know, basically deep-seated in that, like you said, just nail to the grindstone, And then when you look around, the best human work right now, I mean, you could say is like in hospice care and stuff like that very personal, very needed and very human care. Like you don't, you know, necessarily, I guess, need a robot like soon enough, but then also empathy, you know, anything with those type of things. So that's a big thing moving forward, is that people have been working for so long and think that it's such an integral part of life that they forget, you know, our tens of thousands of years of not having to do that much work as hunter-gatherers, you know, and that's just like against our being of play and love and all these other things. So so I guess let's set up this manifesto of human-centered work. Is the first 5 I'll just read is: I believe in work. I believe work can be a vehicle for personal growth. I believe work can be an act of self-expression. I believe work can and should be intensely enjoyable. That's not what you hear every day. And then lastly, I believe productivity, is an excellent sandbox for life. love that line. So I guess break those kind of broadly down in that those are things that people don't usually associate with work, is that, you're just kind of punching the clock, if you will. And what you're saying is that work can be totally fulfilling, can be totally creative.
Yeah, it can. And there's something here where, personal growth is a privilege.
Yes.
It's totally a privilege to have the time, the
Absolutely.
space, to have permission from your family, from your culture, from yourself, to do
That's an
something.
important point. That's a very important point.
It really, it's a privilege in terms of money too.
Yep.
In San Francisco, I was a bit of a personal growth junkie, but you do these weekend courses, these like self-empowerment and different things. They work for sure, but they're really expensive and take a lot of time. Even if you do like a free, Vipassana meditation retreat, who has 10 days, 9-10 days to just be off the grid, So it's a tremendous privilege. So that makes me think, and this goes back like when I was in nonprofits, seeing the poorest of the poor in some of these countries where they don't have the resources to acquire the resources.
Right.
It's like they're just at the bottom of the bottom. And so I always thought, well, how, personal growth to me really is the most powerful, effective thing you can do in life. It affects everything, your relationships, your health, your satisfaction, your productivity. So how do we make that more accessible? And the way we make it more accessible is by fusing personal growth and work. Right. Not making personal growth like a retreat, a course, a seminar, but into your very daily work, because you have to do that anyway, and that's what pays the bills.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a part, it's together. And you see this, a lot of the time in Silicon Valley, companies have coaches for you, they will pay for you to do courses. It's becoming part of business culture. But so here's the thing though, it's not just you decide work is enjoyable and you're going to have personal growth and then it just happens. To acquire that privilege, you have to have excellence. What gives you the privilege of doing creative, fulfilling work on the edge of your capabilities is you do it really well.
Yeah, the rigor to that,
yes.
that continual kind of not moving the goalpost, but then getting down and down and
to the very source, the source of the problem, and really doing it with skill and with excellence and with intention. And that's what has led me to productivity. A lot of people say you shouldn't use the word productivity. It doesn't describe what you do. You should use a different word. I don't know of a better word, because it comes down to that moment to moment, every minute. What are you doing? How well are you doing it? Yeah. Is that moment making the next moment better? Or are you progressing? Or are you just doing stuff? Right. I really feel like productivity is like very close to the ground. It's very close. It's like the metal. You're right on the metal.
Like right on the foundation. So then, well, in terms of productivity, I guess you could say that has changed over time too. So like back in the day, it was X or whatever, and then now it's really, again, going back to the attention. So how can we kind of parse that out? Because if you're working and doing all these things and it's taking up a lot of your attention, how much of that personal growth can really get in there? If you're, but then at the same time, if you're only worried about personal growth, how much rigor, are you doing from the other things of work, of basically, being called on bullshit. If you try and make something and in a business kind of situation, you usually have to, is it good enough? Is it not? Etc. So I'm trying to see of how you fuse work and personal growth in the sense of, is it only thinking about the future? I guess you could say the future work that you yourself are trying to do in the future and then always striving towards that? Or is it really just taking yourself out and then working on yourself, like you said?
Yeah, it's tough because you start to get into, it's different for different people.
No, totally. And I don't want to, parsimonious out too.
Yeah. I think it depends. Sometimes you do need to step away. Yeah. One thing I'm really interested in these days is trauma.
Okay.
Because I've noticed, I read a book recently called The Body Keeps the Score. Did a course that's based on that book, a week-long course, speaking of things that are off the grid. That was all about healing trauma. And the reason that's related is all the challenges that people come to me with their productivity, I can't pay attention, I can't focus, I procrastinate, all these things, appeared in this book. They're symptoms of trauma. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you look at, we were talking about dissociation and focus, ADHD, yes. It's pretty clear, has clear connections to childhood trauma. As a child, you can't often escape the situation where you're being traumatized because it's your caregiver, it's your school. So what do? You just leave mentally. And that becomes a mental habit. Every time you're uncomfortable, There you
See
go.
you later.
But what an amazing thing that I learned in this book that I really didn't expect. I've always had the opposite. I can focus instantly and just go down the wormhole. But I learned in the book that is equally a symptom of trauma. That's just a different way of dissociating.
Right.
You just lose yourself in the thing.
Right.
And it's funny because society rewards this one, right? Because you can produce things, you can get things done. But a lot of my customers, they're like elite knowledge workers. And this is another thing you see is they get to a point in their life of success and achievement where they have everything that they thought they wanted.
Right.
But then they actually confront that inner inability to just be with their memories, with their past, with their relationships, and it manifests as all sorts of coping mechanisms and really difficult things. So I'm not sure how we got off on that track, but
no, it's totally fun. Well, when we're talking about like other people and wanting to change, I guess you could say, and they want to go to change their personal journey, but then also change their work situation. Maybe they want to get to that creative process. And one of your points is, I believe the main obstacle to adopting new productivity methods is people's limiting beliefs. And I think one of the things that has affected me so much is that unless you're doing it 100%, and unless you're doing it all the way, then it really doesn't matter. But in reality, nowadays, I'm on the opposite side of like the atomic habits side that we've kind of read and talked about, is that it's only 1%. Like again, change 1%, and then that will change your outlook on what the future is. Yes, you can try and change 30% if you try it. But if you change 1% over time, over a long period of time, that can drastically change things that I've seen, at least personally. And that can be one of the things that it limits beliefs, that you can't do it. And so I guess how do you get people's mindsets in that, even if they are, I guess, failure, that's what I'm trying to talk about, the trauma of, I guess, failing, failing over and over, failing. It's like, to be that, you almost have to be an entrepreneur in modernity of yourself, but that takes a lot of time, especially mental resources. So how do you not limit people's beliefs, but then still give them kind of a pathway to try and be more productive, be more on a personal journey?
Yeah, it's real work. Personal growth is not, it's real work, really facing some hard things.
Right.
And I think what I would say about that is the thing about personal growth is you learn whatever you need, and it's different things for different people. For you, the 1% better every day was like probably a huge light bulb, right? But for another person who say that's more natural for them, the all-out bet the farm mentality can be just as transformational.
And
right?
I think I've maybe gone through phases of each of those.
You do.
Yes.
Everything is cycles.
Yeah.
You go to one extreme, and then you come back to the other extreme. You try out one belief, and then you do another belief. But I really believe that your body, your mind, it knows what it needs. Like meditation is a great example. Like who would have thought, this is why my first meditation retreat was so shocking to me. I was like, I'm sitting on a cushion for 10 hours a day for 10 days, and I'm supposed to learn something, but where is it coming from? No one is teaching me. I'm not reading anything. And then sitting there and watching learning happen. Like things coming up, new possibilities, new insights, new ideas, and realizing that actually I don't know what you call it, my body, my spirit is this reservoir of timeless wisdom that I don't have to go. I was such a hunter-gatherer of knowledge, just like read late into the night and just like hunting. And to just realize that at a certain level I have everything I need. I just need to stop getting in the way and just let it arise.
Yeah. And then it's like noticing those things, and then how to maybe get yourself into more of those situations that then it arises more.
I think a lot of it does come down to courage.
Okay.
There's these key moments where you have to decide to turn towards the discomfort rather than away.
Very good point.
And that looks for some people, that discomfort is stepping outside of their house. For other people, it's speaking in front of 1,000 people.
Right.
It's really different. I have a friend who's really afraid of submarines. She has a phobia of submarines, facing even things shaped like submarines. That's her, everyone has this comfort zone and there's an edge. Yep. And you know where that edge, because it shows up everywhere. That's the thing. You think you can just go, oh, that's my growth edge. I'm just not going to go over there. But then the edge grows.
Right.
If you're, let's say, have trouble with people, and you decide, I'm going to work only on my computer, I'm going to work remotely, and I've solved that. You haven't solved that. Soon the postman is confronting you. You're wanting to go to the store and feeling terrified. It's like that growth edge grows until it just takes over your life. So might as well face it.
Yeah. You might as well. And then as well, it seems to me that like, not to get too woo-woo or whatever, but like it seems like the universe kind of just throws things at you that you need to get through, and it will continue to do so until you get the lesson. And then, so for that though, I guess the lesson that I've kind of taken from the future of work is that imagination seems like that it can be a very, very big resource moving forward, especially into like the digital realm of creating worlds and things like that. So I guess one of the things you mentioned on one of your posts is the future of work is about providing opportunities for pragmatic imagination to take hold in a new generation, for deriving pleasure from one's professional life, for people to function as human beings rather than resources in the workplace. So I guess I would just expand on that. We talked a little bit more about not being a resource in the workplace and kind of trying to create your own creative process. But then how can imagination really be kind of a beacon for the next generation? Because like you said, you're 34, I'm 31. So for younger people coming up, like how can we make sure that their imagination comfort edge is as far and, as possible rather than close, and then they're, they don't want to do things that maybe should be doing because it's convenient, et cetera.
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot, really a lot. I think imagination is important because we can do anything now. Yeah. You and I could sit in these chairs and in 30 minutes start a company or launch a conference or like whatever it is. It's just everything is ephemeral, intangible, intellectual property transmitted through the internet, right? So then the bottleneck moves. The bottleneck used to be like resources, who you knew, who you had access to. Right. The bottleneck has moved much earlier in the process to just what do you have the courage to conceive? To conceive, of course, and then to actually act on that. That's the pragmatic part, right? Pure imagination is too divergent. It dissipates your energy. You need that second step. And again, why I love productivity. What is productivity without imagination is just a bunch of empty containers. You need the fluid, the energy of the imagination. But then if you have productivity, there's somewhere for it to go. There's an engine for it to fuel. Which is why when I meet creative people, I give them productivity stuff. When I meet productive people, I give them creative stuff. It's like, you really need both.
Well, and it harkens back to, I think, a central thing of not just existence or other things, but the duality of a lot of things, individual, community, productivity, or attention, creativity, or productivity, creativity. So I think that really is a big kind of talking point, in that when you have a duality of that, you cannot segment yourself to one, you cannot segment yourself to the other, and you can't segment yourself to none, because creativity is around, productivity is around. Like, you are in the knowledge market nowadays, and by just working and living as a human being now in modernity.
It's no longer a choice.
Right.
It's no longer a choice. We're all in it, might as well get good at it.
Right.
It's like that quote, we are all, with technology, we're all now as gods. I think, was it Stuart Brand that said that? Okay. Might as well get good at it. Like, we have these powers, we just do. Might as well learn to wield them to the things that matter to us.
And then it's such a need to do that as well, because there's so much, I guess, creativity needed, and imagination needed, because it has been. You see glimpses of it. There's these small portions of like creativity in the arts and stuff that really push people. But imagine what everyone would be like, or imagine what society or life would be like if everyone was given that kind of carte blanche. Hey, go play, go imagine, go make things, and if you didn't have to kind of keep up with this rat race.
And we're so close to that. Like, you look at social media, the same person that goes, okay, I have no creativity is spending, I think the average Instagram user spends 100 hours a year on Instagram.
Wow.
What are you doing there if not getting inspired, posting your own photos, editing them, cropping them perfectly?
Well, what is the ROI of that? Like, what are you getting from that attention that just took 100 hours of your entire year?
Exactly. And I'm not even going to say social media is bad.
No.
Social media has become a fundamental part of society.
Absolutely.
It's just, if you're going to do that, and you are going to do it, learn to do it well. Take the best photos you can take. Right. Make calls to action. Ask people to sign up to your email list. Even if you have no idea what you're going to email them. Ask them to follow you. Sell something. Yeah. I really think I'm totally unashamed about being commercial and using, like, gosh, distribution used to be impossible. Even if you had the best product in the world, you had no distribution unless you were like Standard Oil or something.
Yes.
And now we all have instantaneous global distribution,
Right.
and we complain that we can't think of anything.
That's a very good point. Okay, and then so I guess one of the things I did want to mention to you, because it's like, or talk to you about, is the practical nature of all this is, you come up with an idea, you make a newsletter or a blog. You come up with this thing for Second Brain, you make a course. And again, this theory to action, and actually doing it. Well, you did make a practical choice of literally looking around and then saying, hey, I'm going to do a courageous, and then other people would say maybe non-efficient thing of moving to Mexico City to an international thing. So like, take us through your thinking of, well, it came up as a theory, but then the actionable thing made sense for you to go down to Mexico City for at least a little bit, because you mentioned that coming back to Long Beach possibly next year. But like, that takes a lot of courage just to even think about that idea. Then when it comes up, the opportunity comes, then you actually take it, and then actually now you're fulfilling it by doing that. So take us through like theory to action, because like that's a real world use case that some viewer could take, that like, well, how can I be courageous? Well, you've done it in a lot of different ways, and I think moving internationally is one of the biggest things that you could do, is set up a business.
Yeah, inefficiency is wonderful. It's wonderful to be inefficient, but you can only choose to become inefficient if you're already efficient.
That's a good way to put it.
Mexico really was the confluence of a few things. My wife is Mexican American. She was born here. Several generations have been here. She wanted to learn Spanish. I've been remote essentially the whole time I've had the business. She left her job in San Francisco end of last year, and we just realized again these possibilities, these opportunities. It's like, and it's funny, you just like really have to realize it. We were sitting in the kitchen just like, wait, we could move. It's like, oh, you have to expand kind of the range of things you're considering. And so it was her becoming remote. She now works with me and also has her own online course. So we're basically doing the same thing. Wanted to live in a Spanish-speaking country, wanted to live in a big city, and wanted to be close to our families in Southern California. There's only one city that fulfills all those three criteria. And it really is close. It's a 3.5 hour flight from Mexico City to LA, where our families live. And we come back more often than when we lived in San Francisco.
And that's
funny.
That's an hour and a half, on a flight. You're up and then you're down.
Yeah, it's just like commuting. We come back almost every month, sometimes for a weekend.
Wow.
You can get flights as cheap as $100 one way, each way.
Okay.
It's like, and actually I think, so I'm working on a post why Mexico City is going to be the future hub for remote workers. It is the best city for remote workers I've ever been to. And people don't realize it because of its bad reputation, which is totally unjustified. Everyone I talk to is like, aren't there just like daily shootings in the streets?
Oh, when I was in Tijuana, that was the same thing. Like,
right?
Apparently it's like, gangs and everything. It's like,
it's probably statistically, it is more dangerous. But when we lived in Oakland, we witnessed 2 shootings on our street. It's not like the U.S. is, a paradise of peace and quiet.
No, very true.
So I think you got to go for those kinds of things. And the future of work, man, is going to be so about that. Especially when we have global internet. Because right now, actually, connectivity is quite challenging. But when you can get just fantastic internet anywhere, you're going to have people living in shacks on the North Pole, in like the bottom of the tip of South Africa, on boats in the middle of the ocean. Like the constraint, the deciding factor will be, what do you need for your creativity? Yeah. Growing up with an artist as a father, it was always like this. If he kind of lost inspiration, we're moving to Brazil. That wasn't like the main driving force, but it was like he actually used our trip to Brazil to stimulate his creativity. Sure. He took a trip to China, comes back and is making all these Chinese themed paintings. You use your life to fuel your work instead of, deciding your life based on what you have to do for your work.
That's a very good point. Very good point. And then so lastly, I ask every person on Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations, the overview effect is basically when astronauts get up to the International Space Station or the moon level, and then look down at Earth, and they kind of have a psychological shift of like a oneness. What would you say if the world was looking up at you, say again an elevator pitch, 30 seconds or so? Like what would you say if you had the opportunity to tell the world something? I know that's a big question, but what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I the thing that comes to mind is kind of what we were saying earlier, which is let the machines have the jobs. Let them have it. At least the current jobs, or the easy jobs, or the jobs that don't need a full-fledged human to do. You know, it makes me really sad when I see, especially in Mexico, it's this way. They'll just hire someone to just like stand somewhere all day long. You know, in Mexico, labor is quite cheap, so they can do that. Or there'll be 5 people just like at a parking garage, just watching it.
Right.
And I understand that you need a lot of education. It's a great privilege to do knowledge work, to do creative work, but it really makes me sad when I see a human, the most precious, complex thing in the universe, being dedicated to just being a stationary object. And I kind of see it as my mission to make knowledge work universal.
That's good.
To make it accessible to everyone who wants to do it, basically.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great way to end it, because, you know, we'll let the robots or whoever take that work and, you know, focus on human-centered work for the future. Cool. So, well, thanks, Tiago. Thanks so much for coming on Conversations by Eclectic Spacewalk. And until next time, ad Astra.